For most of his life, Wolfgang Van Halen has lived beneath a vast shadow, the kind cast by a legend. As the son of guitar icon Eddie Van Halen and actress Valerie Bertinelli, he was born into a world of fame, talent, and expectations he never asked for. Yet, behind the bright lights and public smiles, his life has been marked by loss, solitude, and a constant struggle to prove that his name represented more than just an inheritance. What began as a childhood steeped in music soon turned into a lifelong journey of self-discovery and survival. For Wolfgang, music wasn't merely a career, it was part of his DNA. But that gift came with its own burden. Being the son of one of the most celebrated guitarists in history meant facing endless comparisons. From the moment he took his first steps, people had already decided what he was destined to become. What they couldn't see was the quiet battle raging within him, the desire to be recognized as himself, not just as a shadow of a legend. Born in 1991 to Eddie Van Halen and Valerie Bertinelli, Wolfgang entered a world already buzzing with fame and attention. The cameras, the fans, the myth of Van Halen, all of it existed long before he could even grasp what music truly was. Despite the fame surrounding them, his parents made home life as normal as possible. Valerie and Eddie wanted their son to grow up grounded, free from the excesses of celebrity life. They didn't force him toward the stage or studio. Instead, they gave him room to explore who he was. "My mom did a really good job at grounding me," Wolfgang would later say. It wasn't lavish or insane. It felt completely normal. Even though rock stars were regular visitors, his childhood wasn't one of glamour. He spent more time with toys than instruments, more time watching cartoons than strumming guitars. To outsiders, Wolfgang was destined to inherit his father's legacy. But inside, he was a quiet, thoughtful kid with a kind heart. A boy who loved music, but hadn't yet realized how deeply it would shape his life. That innocence faded one day when he stumbled upon a collection of Van Halen records in his father's home. On the covers were faces he didn't recognize, bright lights, crowds, and his father holding a guitar that seemed almost alive. "I saw my name on the box," he later remembered. "I asked my dad, 'What's this?' And he said, 'Oh yeah, this is what I do.'" That simple exchange changed everything. The man who had taught him how to ride a bike was suddenly revealed as a hero to millions. But with that revelation came an unshakable pressure. From then on, every note Wolfgang played would be compared to his father's. Every bit of praise would come with the shadow of a comparison. His name became both a blessing and a burden. Even as a child, he somehow understood that the only way forward was to stay true to himself. He didn't want to become the next Eddie Van Halen. He wanted to become the first Wolfgang Van Halen. That commitment to forging his own identity while honoring his father's legacy would go on to shape his life, his music, and the way he endured heartbreak. Behind all the fame and recognition was a story of quiet determination, built not on privilege, but on perseverance. This is the story of how a boy born into greatness learned to shine in his own way, a boy who wasn't allowed to dream too loudly. In the early 1990s, while the world worshipped Eddie Van Halen as a guitar god, young Wolfgang was living a life far removed from the chaos of fame. His childhood was intentionally quiet, nothing like the world expected from a rock star's son. Valerie Bertinelli worked hard to protect him from the noise, temptation, and attention that had followed Eddie for decades. She created a home that valued warmth and structure over luxury. Despite the guitars and gold records hanging on the walls, Wolfgang's childhood revolved around simple routines, family dinners, homework, laughter, and peace. Eddie, too, was not the person the world imagined when he was at home. The wild, larger-than-life musician was replaced by a gentle, patient, and sometimes shy father. He nurtured Wolfgang's curiosity but never forced him into music. "He's the reason I do what I do," Wolfgang later said, "but he never told me what I had to be." That balance between guidance and freedom planted the seeds of independence in his son. It wasn't until Wolfgang was about 8 years old that music began to quietly take root in his life. One day, Eddie handed him a pair of drumsticks and told him to start with rhythm. There were no stage lights or fans, just a father and son learning the basics. Eddie didn't start him on guitar because he didn't want him to imitate. He wanted him to learn discipline, timing, and patience. He put a stack of magazines on the table, Wolfgang recalled. He told me, if you can hit these in time, that's what playing drums is. It was an unconventional lesson, but it worked. Before long, the sound of drumsticks hitting paper filled their home, and soon Eddie rewarded his son with a small drum kit. What began as a game quickly grew serious. Wolfgang would spend hours locked in his room, practicing until his hands ached. Eddie would quietly listen from the hallway, smiling proudly. He never had to push. Wolfgang was driven on his own. By 9, he had developed real talent, impressing even his uncle, Alex Van Halen, the band's drummer. Yet despite his growing ability, Wolfgang's world remained innocent. He didn't yet understand the weight of the Van Halen name. When he visited rehearsals, he thought the massive drum sets and guitars were just oversized toys. His parents made sure he could enjoy being a child before becoming anything else. In that safe and loving environment, Wolfgang's character was built, one grounded in humility, curiosity, and quiet strength. Qualities that would one day carry him through unimaginable loss and help him become not just the son of a legend, but a legend in his own right. Neither Wolfgang nor his parents could have known back then that the rhythm he practiced as a young boy, steady, patient, and unbroken, would one day carry him through the darkest moments of his life and the overwhelming storms of fame that waited just beyond the horizon. By the time he reached his teenage years, that quiet rhythm of childhood had transformed into something louder, more complex, and far more challenging. After spending years behind the drum kit, Wolfgang found himself irresistibly drawn to the guitar. It seemed inevitable considering he grew up in a home where some of the most iconic guitar riffs in rock history were born. Yet for him, this wasn't about emulating his father. It was about curiosity, about discovering how sound could express emotion and tell a story. His father, Eddie Van Halen, had revolutionized rock music forever, but teaching wasn't his strength. He'd just say, "Do this," Wolfgang once recalled, and then play something only Eddie Van Halen could do. The distance between father and son wasn't emotional. It was technical. How could anyone teach genius? Eddie's brilliance was instinctive, not structured. And Wolfgang quickly realized that if he wanted to truly learn, he would have to teach himself. He started from scratch, diving into guitar tabs, listening to bands like Blink-182 and System of a Down, and experimenting with melodies late at night when the house was quiet. During these late sessions, Wolfgang began crafting his own unique sound, rooted in the rhythm he had developed from drumming, but shaped by the restless energy of adolescence. He had no interest in mimicking Van Halen's lightning-fast solos or stadium anthems. Instead, he wanted something raw, authentic, and modern. "It was important that I develop my own skills and my own sound," he told Spin. "Otherwise, you'd just be listening to some shoddy Van Halen cover band." That attitude, part defiance, part self-preservation, became the foundation of his artistry. But as Wolfgang began finding his musical identity, he also came face to face with the harsh realities of fame. The media was more fascinated by his last name than his progress. Every photo, interview, or rumor came with the same tagline: Eddie Van Halen's son. Before he ever stepped on stage, people had already decided who he was and who he wasn't. His mother, Valerie, did her best to protect him, but even she couldn't drown out the noise. For a boy barely in high school, the spotlight was already blinding. Then came 2006, the year that changed everything. Eddie, struggling with health and personal issues, found new motivation in his son's growing talent. He invited Wolfgang to jam with him and his brother Alex, the drummer for Van Halen. To everyone's surprise, the chemistry was instant. Alex was stunned to learn that the powerful bass lines coming through his headphones were being played by his teenage nephew. "That's Wolf?" he asked in disbelief. It wasn't just a touching family moment. It was the beginning of something bigger. When Eddie asked his 15-year-old son to officially join Van Halen as their new bassist, Wolfgang hesitated. He knew the accusations would come, claims of nepotism, favoritism, and unearned privilege. Still, he agreed, adding with a smirk, "I'll do it, but I'm not doing any bass solos." That joke hid real fear. He was stepping into one of the biggest bands in the world, surrounded by skeptics who doubted him before he'd played a single note. What followed, the 2007 to 2008 reunion tour, with David Lee Roth, pushed Wolfgang to his limits and marked the beginning of his lifelong mission to prove that he was more than just Eddie Van Halen's son. He wanted to be seen as his own artist, and he was prepared to earn that recognition the hard way. As Wolfgang grew, his curiosity deepened into obsession. By the age of 12, he was experimenting with guitar again, this time entirely on his own. "My dad wasn't the best teacher," he once joked. He'd just say, "Do this," and then play something insane. Determined to develop his own sound, he studied tabs from bands like System of a Down and Blink-182, refusing to become a clone of his father. "It was important that I develop my own skills and my own sound," he told Spin. "Otherwise, you'd just be listening to some shaky Van Halen cover band." By 2006, when he was only 15, Eddie made the decision that would push his son into the center of global attention. He invited Wolfgang to officially join Van Halen, replacing longtime bassist Michael Anthony. To fans, it was controversial, an act of nepotism. But to Wolfgang, it was a test of fire. He loved his father deeply, but felt crushed by the weight of expectation. "It was tough," he admitted. "I was there to support my dad, but I became the biggest enemy of every 40 to 50-year-old man out there. Every performance, every note became a trial of legitimacy." Yet Wolfgang proved himself. The 2007-2008 reunion tour silenced many critics, and even Van Halen's 2012 album, A Different Kind of Truth, bore his creative influence. Still, the hostility he faced left deep scars. "That did a lot of damage to me," he admitted years later. "I wasn't just trying to make music. I was trying to survive it." After years on the road, Wolfgang longed to break free and create something of his own. In 2013, he joined Tremonti, the band founded by Creed's Mark Tremonti, not as Eddie Van Halen's son, but as a working musician. He recalled one wild moment when he joined the group in New Jersey. "I went over one night at midnight and learned the entire set. And the next day, we were on tour." He went on to record 2 albums with the band, Cauterize and Dust, balancing his dual existence between Van Halen and his pursuit of independence from his family's shadow. But just when things seemed to be settling, fate struck a devastating blow. In 2020, tragedy hit. Eddie Van Halen's battle with cancer, first diagnosed in 2001, returned fiercely years later. On October 6, 2020, the world lost one of its most legendary guitarists. For Wolfgang Van Halen, that day marked the moment his world completely fell apart. "Some days are better than others," he tearfully told Carson Daly. "It doesn't seem like the pain will ever go away." The grief nearly consumed him. "I feel like crawling in a hole every day," he admitted. "But I know my dad would be really pissed off at me if I did." In the months that followed, Wolfgang channeled his sorrow into his music. Each chord became a dialogue with his father's memory, a tribute, a release and a burden all at once. In 2021, Wolfgang released his debut album, Mammoth WVH. The title held deep personal meaning, as Mammoth was the name of his father's very first band, long before Van Halen was formed. For Wolfgang, it symbolized honoring his father's legacy while forging his own path. He played every instrument on the album, drums, bass, guitar, and vocals, completely by himself. "It's 100% all me," he told NPR. "It's more pressure, but it's creatively freeing." The album's lead single, Distance, written in memory of his father, topped Billboard's hard rock chart and earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Rock Song. It was his first solo success and a powerful moment of validation. "We came, we saw, but we did not conquer," he joked on Instagram while posing with his mother Valerie and girlfriend Andrea Alop at the 2022 Grammys. Beneath the humor, though, was emotion. Eddie hadn't won a Grammy on his first try either. "I guess I'm following in his footsteps," Wolfgang said softly. Later that year, he took Mammoth WVH on tour, stepping into the spotlight not as a bassist, but as a frontman, a role that terrified him. "I was sitting in the dressing room thinking, I don't know if I can do this," he confessed. But the moment he stepped on stage, something shifted. For the first time, he wasn't performing his father's songs. He was performing his own. A new chapter had begun. In 2023, Wolfgang's life changed once again. After 8 years of dating, he married photographer Andrea Alop in an intimate ceremony